Good morning, everyone. And as I say every time, welcome back if you've joined us before in our previous sessions. We're happy to see you. And if this is your first session, we're happy to have you. So welcome to the PowerCat AI webinars. Uh, I am your host, or one of your hosts, Ashley Nuzema. And if you joined us before, then you know that I'll be kind of in the background with helping with questions and polling. And then we have our two speakers, Yoni Friedman and Adi Leibowitz, and I will allow them to introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, thank you, Ashley. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm a product manager in the Copilot Studio team, specifically focused on autonomous agents. Adi, over to you.
Yeah. Hey, hi everyone. So I'm part of PowerCat. I'm a solution architect working with our customers, helping them be successful with Copilot Studio implementations.
Awesome. And thank you guys for being here today. I'm excited.
Super excited to be with you all today. Thanks again for the time. Here's what I'm hoping that folks walk away with over the next, once we're done, over the next hour or so. First of all, we want to create clarity on the concept of autonomous agents. I know that there's a lot of terminology flying around in the industry in many conversations. If you haven't heard the word agent in the first 3 minutes, you're kind of, oh, what's going on? Am I in the first conversation right now? I want to make sure that we understand some select customer use cases, what we're seeing real enterprise customers do today with autonomous agents, talk about some of the key new features that we have that are unlocking powerful solutions. You would have seen a live demo of autonomous agents, and then any questions that you have answered. We'll have a significant block of time in which Adi will be talking about best practices. So we're planning to get super tactical after we go through a bit of an overview and framing to make sure that everybody's on the same page. All right. So when we think about agents, we think about them as existing on a continuum, right? And I'll sort of assume that everybody wants to skip the preamble and the marketing slides, et cetera. So I'm jumping straight into it. We have agents that on the leftmost side that are the simplest type of agent, which we refer to as a retrieval agent. This is essentially a Q&A agent that is grounded in your own company's data. As an example, I have an agent that's deployed into my Copilot that's called Know Your Customer. Before every single meeting I go to that agent, I ask it the question, give me a report about customer X. The agent goes into both external information, so searches the web, as well as our internal databases, and gives me information about things like the number of licenses that they have per product, the usage of each of these licenses, some of the key opportunities that we have opened with them, and so on and so forth. So this is a retrieval agent, a Q&A agent that has access to our own internal and external sources of information and can have a conversation with me. If, for example, I could also ask this Know Your Customer agent to perform some form of action on my behalf. Let's say I could have it send an email to the account executive in the account. That would also make it then a task-oriented agent, meaning it's just in addition to having a conversation with me, it's also capable of performing actions. One example of an action is sending an email. And then the frontier type of agent, which we are focused on today, are the autonomous agents, which are generally available since March of this year. So really kind of the most innovative type. So let's talk about what makes that agent autonomous. There are really two key things to remember here. One is, as many of you had pointed out, it can independently start working based on a trigger. From a technical perspective, it's not such a huge deal. It's essentially some form of event trigger that puts an agent into action, as opposed to a prompt from a user that would put it into work. So it's system event versus prompt that comes in. In fact, in many of the triggers, we will even wrap the trigger up as a prompt, as if it's a human prompt that's coming in, even though that it's a system event. If you think about it from a technical point of view, it's not really a huge deal. But if you think about it from an organizational structure point of view, and what that means to companies that are building and using autonomous agents today, it's quite the paradigm shift. If you start thinking about the idea of, hey, I have processes running in my organization that are currently only as large in terms of scale and as fast executed as the number of humans and their response times that we can put on these processes. Once you remove these constraints, that creates an organization that looks completely differently. And we're seeing a lot of enterprises starting to walk that path into that transformation. The second most important thing is this idea, this third line item here, is this dynamically reasoning over its capabilities. And I think a few of you had mentioned that as well. The way that we think about building and training an autonomous agent is very similar to how you might think about onboarding a new employee into a company. And you'll see that as we start getting into the product as well. High level, what we're shooting for is for an agent that is, when it gets the trigger, when it is put into action, that is capable of figuring out for itself what to do and being able to do that flexibly, which is also one thing that something that I saw a few of you had provided as a response. So going back to this analogy of an employee, if I'm onboarding an employee, the high level there is, let's take an example of someone who's in charge of onboarding new employees into a company, someone in HR, let's say. The way that you would think about onboarding them is first you'd say, hey, your job is to onboard new employees. That's the high level description of your role. And then describe them kind of the high level flow of what an onboarding process looks like and what their involvement. If you could please mute unless you have a very burning question, that would be helpful.
Go ahead, Yoni, I muted them. Yeah.
Thank you. So if I will first describe to this person, to this employee, what their high-level flow would be in onboarding a new employee into the company, and then I would give them access to tools that they need to use. So let's say they need to use Workday, and maybe they need access to an email and to Teams, and maybe some other systems, as well as access to knowledge bases that explain to them what our policies are, what does the organization structure look like, who does this new employee need to interact with, maybe who do they need to start meeting with as part of their onboarding, what's our training look like, what sort of things do they need to start learning as they get into the role. So I give them access to that knowledge, to these knowledge sources as well. And then I tell them, look, so next time when a new employee is added to the company, I want you to onboard them. And, good luck with your new role. We're excited to have you. That's the same way that we train an autonomous agent today, and we'll see it in action here shortly. All right, I want to talk a little bit about that idea of the organizational transformation that we are starting to see and expecting to evolve over the coming months and years. We think of this transformation in three high level levels. At the beginning and the basic most level, and you can kind of map this to the retrieval, task, and autonomous types of agents as well. We expect that humans are working with assistants. And then in the Microsoft case, the assistant is this Copilot. And we expect every person to be augmented by a Copilot through which they deploy agents that do various things. On the second level of organizational transformation, we expect teams to transition into a world where each of these teams includes some AI agents that are managed by humans and can complete some tasks autonomously. I take myself as an example. Compared to the way that I was working just even a year ago, where I was kind of purely a knowledge worker that is sometimes augmented by Copilot. Now I view myself as operating my day-to-day. It's not just how I view myself, but what my day-to-day actually looks like is really like an agent boss. So I find myself in situations where I will ship some task to our researcher agent, go essentially make a plan for how we might price a new feature and set it to work. Then I might go to my analyst agent and ask it to look at our weekly performance metrics and put together a report for me. What sort of things should I be focused on? What can I share with the team? How should I approach it, et cetera, et cetera? And again, set it to work, and then I move on to the next task. And then maybe there's someone who reports to me, and I go and work with them on thinking about how they are prioritizing their work for this week. So it's becoming much more about deploying agents that perform various tasks, as well as at the same time working with my human colleagues, much more than it was before, where I was really focused. I would take a chunk of time and go do a bunch of research and write a paper and so on, and then I would take another chunk of time and analyze metrics, etc. Now it's much more about, hey, agent, go do this, come back to me with output, we'll iterate on that a little bit. And then the third level of this transformation is humans that set the direction and AI agents potentially running entire teams or even departments and then checking in as needed. We're not there yet, but this is truly where it's going towards. We're seeing currently what we're seeing in reality is whole processes being run by agents. So I think we're definitely seeing level 2 transformations right now, but level 3 is where we expect to be going with this. All right. Focusing on what we're seeing right now, what customers are doing. We think of this in 3 kind of pillars. Number 1, and the basic, most kind of lowest hanging fruit that we're seeing customers get value out of is general employee productivity. So as I was just mentioning right now, you have a given employee in an organization. How might we enhance their ability to create value for the organization? Is seeing a lot of investment. The second pillar is general process improvement that starts with driving top line growth, whether it's breaking that down further into how do we generate more leads, how do we convert more leads into initial meetings, how do we convert meetings better into sales, and so on and so forth, as well as then going down that profit and loss statement, right? Thinking about all of the processes that the company runs and incurs costs for. How might we inject and streamline some of these processes to reduce the cost of operation? And finally, the most kind of advanced of our customers are actually building completely new products and experiences that have agents as an underlying capability in them. Here's just as an example, this is what it looks like at Microsoft today. For the general employee productivity, we have M365 Copilot that's deployed for everyone. We have custom agents that are built in Copilot Studio for every single role, and then GitHub Copilot that's deployed for every engineer. The Know Your Customer agent that I just mentioned is a concrete example of one of these custom agents that are deployed, that are built in Copilot Studio and deployed by role within the organization. I did not build it. I don't know who built it. So someone built it, published it, sent it over to IT for approval. IT deployed it to everybody who's in a customer-facing role, and now we have access to that. On the growth and cost reduction side, we've seen $440 million of savings in customer care costs. This is over the last 5 years in using AI in general and Copilot and agents specifically. Reduced close to 800 FTEs in HR help desk and moved folks over to perform higher value tasks. $30 million savings in revenue ops, and the list goes on and on and on. For the new products and experiences, we have all of our Copilot offerings, of course, in the market, and then new consumer AI experiences in LinkedIn, and really the list goes on there. Switching gears a little bit, just about momentum, and I think this is valuable, not as a marketing slide, but to kind of give folks the confidence that this is in production today in large enterprise companies. So we have over 230,000 companies who are using Copilot Studio to create agents for enterprise transformation. And it's just about, in every language, every country, every industry, there are really no outliers. We certainly see some industries that are more front running and have made more progress. But it's really happening across the board. And this is for employees, for customers, and then for B2B scenarios and more and more. These are just a few examples of concrete companies that have created autonomous agents in Copilot Studio specifically to improve customer experience while reducing costs and risks. Let me just highlight a few here quickly. One example is Dow Chemical, who built a supply chain cost reduction agent that reviews invoices against contract terms and flags discrepancies. We have Thomson Reuters here, who had built a legal due diligence agent that streamlines and manages merger and acquisition legal processes by automating the data gathering, document review, and then that results in a significant reduction in time and risk. And then a very recent entrant, Boston Consulting Group, BCG, built an agent that streamlines all of the new teams onboarding to a new given project by providing them a very concise brief from all of the internal, external, and openly accessible data that refers to a given space that they're entering. I bring these examples up because I think they're a demonstration of how some of these companies, and by the way, they're relevant across other industries, like I said, across other company sizes, et cetera. So if you think about some of the patterns that you're seeing here, take the Thomson Reuters example, this idea of, hey, I will take a certain input, that in this case is a proposal for an acquisition, and I will automate data gathering, and I will automate document review, and then produce some output and outreach to some stakeholders, and make a recommendation for additional information that we might need, some more questions, some additional research, et cetera. The pattern holds pretty much for any R&D process that you might want to adopt. It's not specific to the legal due diligence process in any way. And a lot of these are sort of what I think of as transferable patterns that are not specific to a given company, not specific to a given industry. They're really generally applicable. All right, getting a little bit more technical here. So let's talk about concepts that you customize when you're building an agent. The high-level anatomy of an agent consists of knowledge, skills, autonomous capabilities, orchestrator, and foundational models. And you'll see all of this in action. Don't worry if you're not necessarily remembering all of this stuff right now. So you start with the foundation models. These are, kind of a commodity. By default for us, the foundation model that we use is the OpenAI 4.0. There's also the ability to pull in additional models, both within Copilot Studio directly, as well as bringing your own model from something like Azure Foundry. I'll speak a little bit more about that. The key value of this agent, as was already pointed out, including in our initial question, is really the orchestrator, where it decides autonomously how to connect the knowledge, the tools, and the autonomy in terms of the trigger, and create a single flow and decides at runtime how it will approach a given task. Then, of course, there's the user experience that's on top. That's optional. For an autonomous agent, it can completely run in the background. And then what you're seeing on the right-hand side here, the idea of other agents. So this is something that's entering a new capability that's entering public preview in the next few days. And essentially is a response to the idea that as our customers build more and more sophisticated autonomous agents, they require the ability to wrap up a whole process in an agent and then have that agent interact with other agents, both within the Microsoft ecosystem as well as externally, as some of you may have seen in the agent-to-agent framework that we had recently announced support for. So that's coming and is very exciting. High level, I'll say, we believe that organizations will create a very wide range of agents from the simplest that just respond when you prompt them to the most advanced that act autonomously and make their own dynamic plans. They will come in all shapes and sizes. One thing to remember about this is that currently each agent is made up of essentially the same components. This is what you see here on the screen. You might be thinking now about, well, what are my options for building these agents? So let's look at it from right to left here. On the left-hand side, we have here we say for end users, you can think of it as completely non-technical individuals within the organization. We have the agent builder that's embedded within the M365 Copilot and other Microsoft applications, which is essentially a trimmed down version of Copilot Studio that's available there and is a great option for enabling every employee within the organization to build agents for themselves and for their team members that are relatively simple in terms of their abilities. It can be very powerful too. Then in the middle here, we have the standalone Copilot Studio application. This is targeting what we refer to as makers. These are, generally speaking, individuals who understand the organization's data structure and understand the general concepts of IT. They don't need to be developers in any way. You can build very powerful agents in Copilot Studio without writing a single line of code. And then finally, for the developers and for the cases when you want to bring in some specific component, like a very specific foundational model that you want to pull in, or as an example, use Azure Search as a way of accessing knowledge in Azure. We have the tight and tightening integration with Azure AI Foundry and Visual Studio that essentially enables a maker to build an agent in Copilot Studio and then pull in components from Azure AI Foundry. All of those are built on the same data protection capabilities, sharing capabilities and limitations as well, usage limits, reporting, and cost management that really give enterprises the confidence that they have control over agents that are being built within the organization. So if you have something like a response to an RFP and other types of requests for information where really the input can vary significantly, meaning the request that comes in. So let's say you get an email with a request for a proposal. It could have some form of Excel attachment with a bunch of different questions in there. You need to create an agent that can act flexibly, and you're building fairly advanced functionality in terms of the connections that you want to create there, the triggering mechanism. Maybe there's a bunch of different ways that you're accepting RFPs, right? One can be coming in through an email, another one can be some form of form submission. Maybe another one is a document that's uploaded into some form of SharePoint repository or elsewhere. So you want to have the same agent being able to respond to a bunch of different triggers and be flexible in the way that it responds to that. We would recommend using the standalone Copilot Studio application for that. Cool. So as we had talked about, when you're building a relatively sophisticated flow, and I won't sort of repeat everything I said about that previously, you want to use Copilot Studio, the standalone application, for relatively simple yet powerful potential agents like the one that might help new team members ramp up on a given project or on a new role. Agent Builder and M365 can often suffice. And the nice thing is you can start in the Agent Builder and then transition into Copilot Studio if you need to, if you're seeing that you need more capability. When you need to bring in some form of other custom model, or maybe even a model that you had trained yourself, you could pull in those models from AI Foundry into Copilot Studio, into an agent built in Copilot Studio. And then if you're just automating a business process that should behave the same every single time, and you're really looking for that determinism, we recommend Power Automate. And I think this is something that I can't stress enough. Copilot Studio is the platform for building agents in low code at Microsoft. We're certain that there's a huge opportunity. We're seeing it already in terms of transforming organizations with agents. At the same time, it is very clear to us, and we see this again and again and again, that there is a very significant space still left for deterministic, if this then that, automations within organizations, which are also getting more and more powerful as Power Automate adds additional capabilities like generative actions and so on and so forth. So hopefully that makes sense as a high-level overview of what tool to use when. I know this is a question that we often get. All right, quick time check, and then I'll move on. I'll move on to the demo quickly here. Let me pull that up and reshare my screen. All right. Ashley, are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So, folks, right now we are in the standalone Copilot Studio application. And what I wanted to show you is a pre-built autonomous agent. In this case, we'll use a supplier discovery agent. This is an agent that was originally built by Accenture for one of their customers, and they allowed us to rebuild it in our own environment for demo purposes. The general scenario, and if you kind of go back to what I had previously said about this idea of the building of an agent being very similar to the idea of telling a new employee about their job. This is, you'll kind of be able to see this play out here. So high-level description is that, I tell the agent that they need to address inventory surges by identifying and evaluating new suppliers. That it needs to analyze market trends, supply performance metrics, and then align to the company's quality, cost, and delivery standards, and ultimately provide us a recommendation for a new supplier that we will need to source in case of a demand surge. Then I have a bunch of configurations here that I can create. I have analytics and instructions. I won't go through this right now. I'll start by running it, and then we can go into some of the building blocks, and Adi will dive deeper into each one of the components in an agent that he will show. All right, so what I do to run it is I go to triggers, and I run a test trigger. So this is a previously simulated trigger, which is essentially a notification that I get from ERP that says, hey, there's a certain either supplier delay or spike in demand that essentially is telling you, hey, you should get a new supplier onboarded. So I'll hit start testing, and my agent will jump into work here. So it's getting this trigger. It's detected a trigger that it reacts to. And now at runtime, it's putting together a plan to address the trigger that happened. So it takes, in this case, it decided to go get a list of suppliers from the ERP through a connector. These are the existing approved suppliers for the company that aren't necessarily working at this point, but there's from a general pool of suppliers. Then it decides to go and study the supplier's capacity, their location, their previous performance, and so on and so forth. It also decides to go and search the web to get more up-to-date information. What's happening with these suppliers? What news are there in the relevant market, which, as you can see here, is the Arizona FM market. I'm not sure what FM stands for in this case, but that's the market. And as a next step, it decides to use the deep reasoning capability using the O1 deep reasoning model from OpenAI. So this is now natively available in preview within Copilot Studio. We're also working to bring in O3 and O4. And as I mentioned, this is also one of those situations where you might say, hey, I have my own pre-trained model to identify suppliers or perform whatever action. I could bring that in and provide that as a tool to the agent in Copilot Studio. Lastly, it decides to create a report and send me a notification on Teams. Here I am the recipient. And if I go to my Teams channel here, I see a notification that I just received that tells me that, hey, assume that I'm the analyst in this case, due to a forecasted increase in demand, an additional supplier has been identified. In this case, it's Echo Shield FM. And here's a report for what the agent thought through and how it made the decision. So it explains gives me an executive summary of the decision it made. It gives me a comparison of the top ones that it compared and how they compare across several criteria here, and gives me a yearly spend analysis to show me how much we've spent with this vendor over the past year and why we should, potentially that's additionally useful information in this decision that I need to make about onboarding the additional agent here, additional supplier, I should say. So that is essentially the output of that particular agent. We could also, you can imagine really any kind of continuous scenario here where they also send a request for proposal to this supplier, and maybe even creates an engagement with them and starts ordering stuff from them. So the autonomy can go on and on and on. In this case, we decided to involve the human at this step of the process. Quick overview of the components here, and then I'll hand it off to Adi to talk about some of the best practices we have. Natural language instructions. So I don't need to create elaborate decision trees for what the agent needs to do. I just give it natural language instructions to how to perform its job. I link to knowledge sources. In this case, I provided both uploaded documents and links to SharePoint repositories. There's a bunch of other options that you can bring knowledge from. It can be from internal Microsoft resources as well as external, and the list is pretty long. Then I give it access to tools that it needs to do the job. In this case, I gave it access to these flows to create a report and notify on Teams, and then to search the web and get the list of suppliers. List of tools is very long, over 1,400 connectors that are pre-built, and you can build your own connectors. This is a list of the triggers. In this case, I only have one trigger that would put this agent into action, but there can be many triggers that will put it into action. And then finally, there's the agents that I can start connecting this agent to, as an example, if I were to build an agent that then sends and manages the RFP process with the supplier, that would be a cool use case for an agent here. All right, being cognizant of time, I'll pause here. If there are any questions, I'm happy to continue engaging over chat. I want to hand off to Adi to talk about some best practices. I'm sure that some of the questions will actually be answered in Adi's part of the presentation. Adi, over to you.
Thank you. Just let me know if you can see my slide.
Yep.
Cool. So I'm just going to use a couple of slides to give a bit more insight into kind of the brain under the hood. So more specifically, how an autonomous agent makes decisions on like which actions or topics or knowledge sources it needs to orchestrate. If I have time, then I'll try to go through some of these settings in the product, in the authoring portal itself, but not sure that I will. So let's just start and see where this takes us. So this will have some overlap with stuff that Yoni already shared, but I think it's important to set the context. So when a trigger is intercepted by an autonomous agent, we go through a run. So a run is just the orchestrator trying to figure out which components it needs to orchestrate to respond to a trigger. And these components will be multiple knowledge sources, multiple tools. So tools can be connectors, like simple connectors for APIs, more sophisticated connectors like clients for MCP servers, other agents, and so on. And it can also orchestrate topics. Topics allow makers to create their own kind of predetermined logic within Copilot Studio. Once it's orchestrated all its different tools and they've run, then the run is complete. So an example for that would be a trigger can be like an incoming support case in my CRM or ITSM system. And then the orchestrator can use knowledge to figure out what the SLA is for different contracts, for different support contracts, use a tool which is a connector, maybe a Power Platform connector, to fetch contract information from the CRM, use a topic to run some custom logic. Maybe we need to somehow transform the data coming back from CRM, so a topic would be helpful in this context. And then maybe use a different tool to send back an email response. Now, the question is, and I think something that new makers often find themselves asking is, there are different settings in Copilot Studio that can determine this order of execution, this kind of orchestration of the entire run. So it's a question of how do we make sure that the agent orchestrates those components in an efficient way, in a way that will get us the end result that we're looking for. This slide, it may look a little bit intimidating, but I think it will actually bring a lot of order. And again, I'll try to cover these settings in the authoring portal itself. So these are all different goals or situations on the left, and then on the right are the settings in Copilot Studio. Let me just go over these pairs. So when I want to guide the agent on when to call topics and actions, then I will use agent instructions and topic or tools names and descriptions. Often makers name topics and tools in a way that helps them kind of create some order, or helps them tag topics for their own use. But names and descriptions are used by the orchestrator to decide when to invoke topics and actions. So let me just give you an example. Don't just call a tool credit card, call it add a new credit card. That would help the LLM figure out when to invoke this specific tool or topic. When I want to guide the agent on when to use knowledge, I can use agent instructions for that. Right now, we can't use instructions to tell the orchestrator which specific knowledge source should be used. We can only, at a high level, tell the orchestrator use knowledge to figure out like the different SLA levels that we have for contracts. When I want to guide the agent on response formatting, so response formatting can be either avoid discussing certain topics, or use a table as a response format. Then I can either use agent instructions at the top level, or if I'm using a generative answers node, I can use instructions, custom instructions in the node itself. When I want to guide the agent on population of inputs and outputs. So this is a little bit of an advanced concept, but topics and tools, or topics and actions in Copilot Studio from the orchestrator's perspective are a little bit like functions that have a schema of inputs and outputs. And when we want to tell the orchestrator how to populate these inputs and outputs, we will do so by providing descriptions for that schema, for the inputs and outputs. And then I may also want to guide the orchestrator on which knowledge sources, which specific knowledge sources are appropriate for certain situations. So this is dotted because there are in Copilot Studio the descriptions that makers can set or populate for individual knowledge sources, but we use these descriptions only opportunistically. So we may sometimes use them, but if we see behind the scenes that we can handle the entire content that's coming back from knowledge sources, we'll just let the orchestrator figure out the most relevant response or content. So you can use these, but just be aware that these won't act in a deterministic way. That isn't the way to tell the orchestrator or force the orchestrator to always use one knowledge source over another. Let me just share a different screen and try to show you how some of these principles apply. Okay, can you see my sales assistant? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Good. So again, so this will be slightly reminiscent of what Yoni shared, but I'm going to try to go a little bit more deeply into the settings here. So what this does, and let me just start with a run. So this is an autonomous agent that will kind of wake up every 24 hours over every week and review opportunities in CRM, then try to identify opportunities that are at risk. It uses knowledge to identify those opportunities that are at risk based on criteria that we've provided. And then it will compose a report for the sales manager to let them know of those at-risk opportunities. So you can see that when it's running, it is starting by getting the opportunities from the CRM. In this case, it is Salesforce. It is using a Power Platform connector to connect to Salesforce. It is checking for each opportunity. By the way, I really like this kind of experience of looping over each opportunities, because we didn't actually have to define kind of a pre-authored loop. We just guided the agent to go over each and every opportunity. So it is checking in knowledge to see if there's anything that should flag the opportunity as at-risk opportunity. It is then fetching the report template for the email, and it will send an email to the sales manager. Let me just give you an example. So this is the kind of report that is being generated. It has information both from Salesforce and Gong, which is another sales-related system. And I can click on this link and go straight into my opportunity in Salesforce. Let me just go into some of the settings that kind of make this agent work. So obviously start with instructions. The instructions here are pretty simple. When a weekly snapshot is triggered, so this is the incoming event, get deals from CRM. I can specify which action or tool should be used for that, but I don't necessarily need to, and I'll show you why. And then use knowledge to search information for each opportunity. So again, notice I'm saying use knowledge. I'm just not saying which knowledge source specifically. At this point, this is not something we support. And then I'm providing the criteria for opportunities at risk, that opportunities without interaction in the last 10 days are at risk. And then I'm just instructing the agent to send a report. So you can see that the instructions I provide are pretty minimal. They're pretty concise. They're basically guiding the agent on how to use topics and tools it already has. So it's just kind of like optimizing what it already knows about its topics and tools. Let me just show you what I mean. Let's start with get deals from CRM, which is the first one. This will be an action. An action is, or a tool today in the new UI, is basically like a wrapper around a connector, wrap around a Power Platform connector. So what makes the orchestrator identify this tool or this action correctly is both the name, so get deals from CRM, and then the description. This operation gets a list of large opportunities. To be sure to populate both. Sometimes names are even more important than descriptions. And you can see that the name corresponds with my instruction here, get deals from CRM. This allows the orchestrator to be accurate about what it does. And then use knowledge. Again, when I say use knowledge, it will just try to search over all its knowledge sources. In this case, it has a single knowledge source, but it will try to orchestrate over all its knowledge sources and then use just the relevant chunks that it's getting from knowledge sources in the back end. Now, when I instruct the orchestrator to send a report, it will do two things. So let me just show you how that is defined. So sending a report is made out of two different actions, or a topic and then an action. There's this topic, which basically is a way for me to manage the report template. So the report template is basically embedded here in the topic. The topic has a name, again, get report template, because that helps the LLM or helps the orchestrator select the topic in the appropriate context, in the appropriate moment. And there's also the description that says, use this tool, this topic, to get the template for the opportunities at risk report. Now, this is step one for generating the report and sending it. And then step two is sending the report itself. So you can see that, again, the name, send a weekly deal summary, is indicative enough for the orchestrator to select this action in the appropriate moment. But then we have the inputs as well. So if I look at the activity shows me a history of my past runs. I can see that there's a input here, which is the body of the email. This is an HTML body of the email, which is basically linked or comes from the output here. So the output of this topic is the HTML template for the report, so no values. And then the input here is using the template to build the specific email with all the values that we have from the run, from the process. And the reason why the orchestrator is able to kind of efficiently link those two steps together is because if I go to actions and go into this action, I provided a helpful name and description for inputs as well. So if I look at the body for the email, in the description, I put the report based on the HTML report template. So even a text is as simple as that tells the orchestrator that needs to use a previous step, the get report template one, to populate this input. Now, this seems really, really simple, but often we see folks working with the product neglecting some of these settings and then putting overly elaborate instructions in the top level here. You don't need overly elaborate instructions. Just remember to start simple and then iterate. Remember that an autonomous agent specifically is a creature that needs to know how to orchestrate tools or actions and topics, that it needs to know when to call specific actions and topics and in which order. My advice, start from names, descriptions and names for inputs and outputs. Very, very simple instructions, and then build on top of that if you see that you need to optimize its behavior.
Thank you guys for joining us for this session. And yeah, have a good morning, evening, night. We'll see you next time.